The abode alcove bashed with quiet restriction as Representative Jasmine Crockett stepped up to the podium. C-SPAN cameras zoomed in on the apprentice Democrat from Texas, her braided beard neatly pulled back, dressed in adventurous amethyst clothing that stood out amidst a fleet and gray apparel bushing the floor. Aloft the chamber, Apostle Mike Johnson sat durably in his chair, casual as phone, acutely aloof about the bristles annual of attic time allotted to the abrupt congresswoman. Mr. Apostle Crockett began, her accent calm and deliberate, the allowance quieted as her articulation drew attention. Today I acceleration not as a Democrat acclamation Republican, but as an American to join an austere aperture of accessible trust. Johnson looked up briefly, his face composed and accomplished neutrality. To him, it was a distant, accepted accent from the opposition. He nodded heartily and alternate to his phone. Crockett continued, her articulation firming. Last week, you stood at this actual belvedere and assured the American bodies that the new bound legislation was created with, quote, abounding accuracy and aberrant bipartisan input. I accept abstracts that not abandon altercation to claim, but acknowledge the adverse arrangement of advised misinformation presented to associates of this body. This time, Johnson looked up completely, his countenance tightening. Several adjacent assembly chock-full talking. Access adjoined Crockett. These documents, she said, captivation of a binder apparent with the abode seal, appearance that the final bill was secretly afflicted afterwards board approval. Key administration accoutrement were removed and new loopholes added afterwards allegorical buoyed associates who adjourned in acceptable faith, the alcove abounding with murmurs. Johnson set his buzz aside, sitting cocked as Republican whips began effective through the aisles, whispering urgently, but what's alike added concerning. Crockett continued, acid through the noise is what these abstract appearance about who absolutely fabricated those changes. She paused, locking eyes with Johnson. Mr. Speaker, would you like to explain why absolute sections of this bill accommodate accurately exempt from clandestine industry lobbyists? Accent you abandoned certified as agents written? The allowance fell silent. Johnson's announcement palled as he gestured to join the parliamentarian. Camera operators angry amidst Crockett's, abiding accord in Johnson's arresting unease. Point of order, Mr. Speaker, alleged the Republican Majority Leader, aggravating to interrupt. I still accept 4 annual and 20 abnormal left, Crockett said evenly, and I intend to use them. What abundant abutting would accelerate shock aftereffects through Congress and agitate Washington's ability balance. Articulation over. Afore diving into the affirmation Crockett revealed. Bethink to like this video and subscribe for added all-embracing political essay apprehension what absolutely happens axial Washington. Jasmine Crockett hadn't appeared to Congress to chase old rules. A civilian rights advocate afore her 2022 election, she had congened her career on accurate alertness and an assured charge to accountability, while abounding new assemblies spent their aboriginal appellation acquirements a system. Crockett Bound stood out for her research-driven access and alertness to claiming authority. She treats Congress like a courtroom, her aloft law accomplice told the Texas Tribune. She gathers facts, builds her case, and presents it afterwards hesitation, no amount who's on the added side. This adjustment becoming her annual from progressives, but fabricated her a common ambition of bourgeois media, who labeled her aggressive. Her viral acknowledgement on CNN summed it up. Aback men are direct, they're alleged effective. Aback I do it, they alarm me aggressive. I'll break advancing for the bodies who adopted me. Aloft the alcove sat Apostle Mike Johnson, who had taken the blubbering afterwards Kevin McCarthy's removal. The Louisiana Republican styled himself as a steady, faith-driven bourgeois able to chain a disconnected GOP. His calm abode and acceptability for amenity initially becoming him amicableness from colleagues and the press. Johnson represents acknowledgement to civility. Sean Hannity declared afterwards his election. He's a constitutionalist who believes in accuracy and honest debate. But 7 months into his speakership, that angel was eroding. Abstinent Republicans agilely complained about actuality sidelined, while Democrats accused him of breaking acceding promises. The bound bill, now at the centermost of this showdown, had been accustomed by Johnson as his signature bipartisan victory. Afterwards months of gridlock, it anesthetized with abutment from moderates in both parties. Johnson spent the afterward anniversary on media tours, adulating it as affidavit that Congress could still assign aloft the fair lines. What the accessible didn't yet apperceive was that austere questions had arisen over how the final argument was accounting and whether key assurances fabricated during talks had been kept. The implications accomplished far aloft a distinct bill, with midterm elections abutting and ascendancy of Congress uncertain. Any claiming to the Speaker's candor threatened to adapt the political narrative. For Republicans, accusations of bamboozlement cut anon adjoined their attack bulletin of accuracy and reform. This isn't aloof about action fight. Political scientist Melissa Harris Perry appeared beforehand that morning on MSNBC. It's about whether the aldermanic action itself can still be trusted. For Johnson, the claim stakes were immense. His political cast centered on faith, honesty, and trustworthiness. Any above-board affirmation of bamboozlement could abort, not abandon his calendar, but his reputation. For Crockett, the accident was aloof as high. Adjoin the apostle anon on the abode attic with such claims was bold. It could either drag her as assured articulation for accountability or betray her to criticism if her affirmation fell short. The restriction was palpable. Republican associates amassed abreast Johnson, whispering strategy. Democrats watched closely, acquainted that Crockett's abutting move would appearance the moment's impact. As she able to bear her evidence, the force of what was accident was clear. A Aboriginal Appalachian congresswoman was anon accusing the apostle of ambiguous Congress. It was a moment that could acclimatize bound or redefine standards of political accountability in Washington. Johnson adapted his tie and leaned to join the parliamentarian. Conceivably attractive for a procedural escape, but afore he could act, Crockett apprenticed forward. Afore we appraise the adapted bill text, Crockett began, "Let's Aboriginal authorize the ambience." That makes these revisions so concerning. I absolute the accommodation absorption to display she said, as aids broadcast abstracts to members. These are the official annual from the final bipartisan, acceding affair on the Bound Security Act anachronous absolutely 2 weeks ago. She projected an area on the awning arresting to everyone. Page 3 acutely analyzed Apostle Johnson's claimed assurance, and I quote, "No abundant changes will be fabricated to the administration accoutrement in sections 4 through 7 as agreed aloft by this alive group. Every Republican and Democratic affiliate of that accumulation relied on that charge-back arch to abutment the bill. C-SPAN cameras swept aloft the alcove, assuming Republican associates bound scanning their copies, while Apostle Johnson agilely conferred with the abode parliamentarian. Yet Crockett continued, the final argument includes 17 cogent modifications to those aforementioned sections. These aren't accessory edits or abstruse clarifications, but aloft changes that abate administration and actualize new exemptions never discussed in bipartisan talks." She brought up a side-by-side allegory on the screen. For instance, area for EB3 originally appropriate acquiescence analysis, oral 30 days. The final argument now extends it to 180 canicule and allows absolute 90-day extensions. That absolutely removes the accountability timeline absent in Democrats, accepted afore lending their support. Murmurs advance aloft the Democratic ancillary of the chamber. Moderates who had voted for the bill were apparent consulting their staff, pointing to passages with growing frustration. Johnson assuredly rose. "Point of order," he said to the authoritative officer. "The gentleman from Texas is misrepresenting accepted aldermanic updates and suggesting bad acceptance area. There was none. I acknowledge the Speaker's clarification." Crockett responded evenly, "But let's move to display B." New abstracts appeared on the screen. These are emails amidst the Speaker's arch aldermanic aide and associates of the Bound Industry Coalition, a lobbying accumulation apiary clandestine apprehension contractors. Johnson's announcement anchored as she spoke. This email beatific 3 canicule, afterwards a bipartisan accord, and 2 canicule, afore the final abstract, was appear includes an adapter blue-blooded proposed modifications to administration provisions. Aback we analyze a certificate accounting by lobbyists to the final bill text. 15 of the 17 changes bout chat for word. The alcove erupted into noise. Democrats stood while Republicans aggregate in abutting clusters. The authoritative administrator addled the blubbering repeatedly, disturbing to restore order. A fresh Representative Jim Jordan, one of Johnson's abutting allies, approached the well, acutely accessible to interrupt. Crockett aloft her hand. "I still accept my time, and I intend to use it," she said firmly. "The affirmation is not complete." Jordan alternate to his seat. Crockett afresh appeared display C. "This is conceivably the best austere document," she said. A argument bulletin exchanged amidst Apostle Johnson and the Admiral of the Bound Industry Amalgamation, anachronous the day afore the final text release. The Apostle writes, and I quote, "Changes implemented as discussed. Dems won't apprehension until afterwards passage. We'll alarm you afterward the vote." The allowance fell silent. Johnson's face angry pale. Democrats looked stunned, and alike amidst Republicans. Some appeared afraid, while others approved the assemblage about him. Mr. Apostle Crockett said acclamation Johnson directly. "Would you like to explain to this chamber, abnormally to the Democratic associates who voted for this bill in acceptable faith, why you promised no aloft changes while abreast analogous with lobbyists to abate key administration provisions?" Johnson stood again, his articulation tight. "These claims are actuality taken out of context. Those communications were allotment of a custom stakeholder beat to ensure the law could be about implemented. No promises were burst in spirit or intent. The affirmation says otherwise," Crockett replied. She displayed an aperture screen, the bipartisan acceding text, the lobbyist recommendations, and the final bill. "These aren't interpretations. They're absolute comparisons. The administration mechanisms at becoming bipartisan abutment were agilely attenuated based on industry ascribed afterwards apprehension to the associates who adjourned them. The restriction was now palpable. The gavel addled afresh as associates from both parties shouted for recognition. "I accept 1 minute left." Crockett set aloft a noise, her articulation steady, and I appetite to use it to explain why this matters. The allowance gradually quieted. All eyes were on her. "This isn't about action differences," she said, abstinent and clear. "It's about whether this anatomy can action with integrity. A back assembly can affirmation that agreements fabricated in acceptable acceptance will be honored, our academy fails. A back clandestine interests can secretly carbon legislation, afterwards bipartisan consensus. We stop actuality assembly of the people." She angry to face the absolute chamber, not aloof Johnson. "I came to Congress assertive that admitting our divisions, the candor of our action remained untouchable. Today, I ask associates of both parties to prove that acceptance still holds true. As a plan, Crockett's 5 annual assured absolutely as she finished. The weight of her anxiously timed annual lingered in the air as the authoritative officer, visibly unsettled, announced, "The gentlewoman's time has expired." But anybody in the alcove and millions watching the accepted article far added cogent than time had aloof ended. For several moments, blackout abounding the chamber. Then, like a abuse breaking, the allowance erupted. Democrats rose to their feet, some ambitious and actual acknowledgement from Johnson, others calling for an emergency belief inquiry. On the Republican side, acknowledgement apertures sharply. A fair leader's bankrupt ranks about Johnson, while several moderates stood apart, visibly afraid as they advised the abstracts Crockett had distributed. The authoritative administrator addled the blubbering repeatedly. "The abode will be in order. The abode will be in order." Finally, Majority Batten Steve Scalise was recognized. "Mr. Speaker, I move that the abode angle and alcove accountable to the alarm of the chair." Afore the motion could proceed, Democratic Batten Hakey Jeff rose. "Objection. The abode deserves an actual acknowledgement to these austere allegations. The apostle charge abode this anatomy now." The aldermanic bound conferred with the authoritative officer, who appeared afflicted by the procedural restriction unfolding. Amidst the confusion, Johnson approached the able-bodied of the House, signaling as absorbed to speak. The allowance fell silent, all eyes anchored on him. "I acknowledge the adventitious to abode these allegations," Johnson began, his articulation steadier than his expression. "What Representative Crockett presented is an ambiguous annual congenital on careful affirmation and adulterated communications." He straightened, aggravating to activity confidence. The revisions fabricated to the final argument were abstruse adjustments advised to advocate are bipartisan, acceding while ensuring the laws applied enforceability. A scribe was taken from assorted stakeholders, including industry professionals with accordant experience. This is accepted aldermanic practice. Axis had joined the Democratic side. He added, nothing was concealed. Nothing was done in bad faith. If there was any confounding of the provisions, I affliction confusion. But there was no absorbed to mislead. It was an able response, one that ability accepts suffice in accustomed times. But Crockett, still standing, agilely aerial a certificate for anybody to see, the argument bulletin she had cited earlier. Changes implemented as discussed. Dems won't apprehension until afterwards passage. We'll alarm you afterwards a vote. Johnson froze mid-sentence, his aegis colliding with the evidence. The alcove watched as he struggled to accommodate his claims of accuracy with the absoluteness afore him. Then, unexpectedly, Representative Don Bacon, an abstinent Republican from Nebraska, stood. Mr. Speaker, point of claim privilege, he said, his accent accustomed the weight of institutional concern. As affiliate who formed on this legislation in acceptable faith, I ask, are the abstracts presented by Representative Crockett authentic? Did you assure our bipartisan accumulation that no absolute changes will be fabricated while acceptance industry lobbyists to carbon administration provisions? The question, advancing not from a Democrat, but from a Republican colleague, hit the alcove like a thunderclap. Blackout followed as all eyes angry back to Johnson. His abutting words would ascertain not aloof his leadership, but the believability of the abode itself. Johnson looked aloft the alcove from his allies to the afraid faces on both sides. The communications occurred. He assuredly said, articulation lower now, but they've been presented afterwards abounding context. The revisions were oral my ascendancy as apostle to make. An oral blow bouncing through the room. It wasn't a bounding admission, but it wasn't an abnegation either. Representative Bacon remained standing. With respect, Mr. Speaker, ascendancy isn't the issue. Affirmation is. If we can't affirmation that bipartisan agreements will be honored, how can this anatomy function? The catechism lingered changing as added Republicans visibly distanced themselves from a fair leadership. What began as a 5-minute abode by apprentice Democrat had escalated into a bounding crisis of aplomb in the Speaker's leadership. Analysis to drive shift, Jeff arose again. In a blaze of these amazing circumstances, I move that the abode authorize appropriate bipartisan board to investigate the allegations accompanying to Bound Security Act and abode allegation oral 14 days. In a arresting turn, Representative Bacon anon followed. I added the motion and appetite my Republican colleagues to abutment it. If we accept in accuracy and integrity, we should acceptable befalling to bear the abounding truth. Johnson stood arctic at the podium, watching the foundation of his ascendancy crumble in absolute time. The authoritative officer, borderline how to advance amidst the aberrant division, angry helplessly adjoined the parliamentarian. A fresh Crockett batten already more, her accent calm, steady, and chargeless of confrontation. This isn't about partisanship. This moment is about whether agreements fabricated aloft a fair curve still authority meaning. Every affiliate of Congress, behindhand affiliation, has a pale in attention that capital trust. The accuracy and accuracy in her words seemed to bell throughout the chamber. Assembly from both parties nodded in recognition, acknowledging that article axial to their academy had been put at risk, alike if abandoned briefly ambience of breast accessory divides AS leaders from both abandoned aggregate with the aldermanic to a judge on abutting steps. Cameras bent Johnson sitting abandoned at the administration desk, his concrete abreast apron his ambiguous political standing. Oral minutes. Clips of the barter broadcast aloft amusing media, absorption on Johnson's arguable argument bulletin, and his disability to abjure the allegations directly. What began as an accepted 5-minute attic abode had bound become one of the best consequential aldermanic confrontations in contemporary memory. It appeared not abandoned abeyant delinquency in one bill, but additionally added apropos about the candor of the aldermanic action itself. The furnishings of Crockett's 5-minute abode advance far aloft the abode chamber. Oral and hour, Johnson apparent and Crockett receipts were trending nationwide. News alerts lit up phones aloft Washington as networks disconnected approved advantage to air what CNN's Jake Tapper declared as one of the best cogent aldermanic showdowns in avant-garde times. This wasn't aloof political theater. Explained aloft abode Aldermanic Charles Johnson on MSNBC. Representative Crockett presented accurate affidavit that the apostle of the abode secretly adapted by partisan legislation afterward agreement, potentially actionable both abode rules and the basal affirmation that allows Congress to function. Outside the chamber, reporters amidst assembly for reaction. The accessory aperture was noticeable, but not complete. Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez bidding accessible admiration. What Congresswoman Crockett did today was remarkable. She didn't aloof accuse. She produced evidence. This is accountability in absolute time. Republican reactions reflected growing centralized tension. Johnson's allies absolved the abstract as careful or misleading, while absent Republicans accurate, austere unease. Representative Don Bacon broadcast on his beforehand remarks. If these claims are true, they represent a loft aperture of affirmation in our aldermanic system. That's not partisan. It's about attention, the candor of Congress. By evening, the political fallout had escalated. Afterward, a budding Republican appointment meeting, Johnson appeared a accounting statement. I booty apropos about aldermanic accuracy. Seriously. While advice with stakeholders is a accustomed allotment of the process, I affliction any consequence that amendments to the Bound Security Act were fabricated afterwards abounding acknowledgement or in bad faith. I acceptable a absolute analysis of the facts. His alert wording, however, abandoned agitated scrutiny. On Fox News, alike commonly, admiring hosts questioned whether Johnson had debilitated trust. Whatever your politics, said bourgeois analyst Guy Benson, if you acquaint Assembly One affair and bulletin industry leaders article different, that's an absolute believability issue. Overnight polling reflected the public's reaction. Johnson's approval appraisement alone 14 credibility in the Aboriginal post-hearing survey. Added apropos for GOP leadership, 62% of independents and 41% of Republicans said they begin Crockett's affirmation apropos or actual concerning. Abaft the scenes action talks intensified. Democratic leaders, analysis drive before midterms, appear they would force a vote to anatomy an appropriate analytic board if Republicans didn't accede voluntarily. At the aforementioned time, letters alike that abstinent Republicans were abreast analytic whether Johnson could abide in leadership. For Crockett, the after effects brought accelerated acceleration in civic recognition. Her calm, evidence-driven access drew praise, alike from abrupt voices. Whatever one thinks of her politics, wrote bourgeois columnist Jonah Goldberg, Crockett showed what able aldermanic blank looks like. Facts over rhetoric. 3 canicule afterwards confrontation. Washington was abashed to back 23 abstinent Republicans, abutting Democrats to authorize a bipartisan, appropriate board to investigate the Bound Security Act allegations. The motion anesthetized 255 to 180, a acicular admonishment to Johnson's administration and a validation of Crockett's method. In an added setback for Johnson, Republican Assembly Don Bacon, Brian Fitzpatrick, and Nancy Mace appear collective statement. The candor of the aldermanic action charge acceleration aloft of fair loyalty. Aback accepted questions appear about whether bipartisan agreements were respected. All associates accept assignment to accompany the truth. The new board was structured with according Republican and Democratic representation, led by abstinent Republican Mike Turner as armchair and Crockett as carnality chair, formally acknowledging her axial role in advertisement of the affair and signaling her growing access in Congress. For Johnson, the political ache abandoned deepened. A anniversary later, the bourgeois Washington Examiner appear added abstracts acknowledging Crockett's claims, including text amidst Johnson's agents and industry, assembly discussing means to bypass administration accoutrement, afterwards advised Democratic partners. As burden grew, Johnson addressed a Republican appointment of Bath bankrupt doors. Multiple attendees appear that he offered an added above board accepting them before. I fabricated mistakes in how the final bill was managed. I accept the revisions were all important for implementation, but I should accept in cellophane with all associates who helped ability the legislation. But trust, already broken, is difficult to rebuild. His acceptance bootless to stop the assent dissent. 2 weeks afterwards, Crockett's 5-minute attic speech. Republican Representative Ken Buck of Colorado became the aboriginal to about alarm for Johnson's abandonment as Speaker. Trust, already lost, is adamantine to restore, Buck stated. For the acceptable of this academy and able governance, Apostle Johnson should footfall aside,